Welcome back to Nifty 50 Photographers. In today's video, we're talking about some composition tips to help you with your fine art architectural photography. Right, let's get stuck straight in. The first one I want to talk about is symmetry or asymmetry. Now, often the building itself will decide that for you. Is the building itself symmetrical, or is some feature of it symmetrical? And that's exactly what I've done with this structure here, the Midland Hotel, an Art Deco design. And what I've done is taken the central column, which is very symmetrical, and made a symmetrical photo out of it. I've done the same with this bridge shot. Now, bridges tend to lend themselves to that because more often than not they are symmetrical in structure. And by standing in the middle of the bridge, I've been able to make this nice symmetrical image. Now, you will have a lot of instances, probably more than you get chances of symmetrical images, where you want to create an asymmetrical image. And then you're probably going to want to use a different composition like the rule of thirds, which we'll talk about in more detail. But you can see in these shots here, for example, this bridge over the River Lune in Lancaster, I've set the bridge over to one side. This image of a block of flats or accommodation in Lancaster, it's an asymmetrical building, although I did take it head on to create a symmetrical image as well. So you can do both. These other images of the Midland Hotel are also ones that are asymmetrical in their composition, because this is where I felt I could get an interesting shot. Now, you will get some that fall sort of halfway in between, and for example, this image here of Fortin Services, the M6 Lancaster services, where I've had to set that slightly off center because I wanted to balance against the other building, but that's really an asymmetrical image. And there are buildings that genuinely you cannot do anything with that would be symmetrical, like this building that looks like it's leaning into the wind. It was deliberately designed that way, and it's the National Coast Watch Institute building at Rossall Point. It looks out over Morecambe Bay. Now, there's no way I could have taken symmetrical photograph of that, so I've had to offset it to one side. So now let's talk about the rule of thirds and how you might want to use that. As I say, there'll be a lot of buildings which don't just fall into that symmetrical category. So if you look at this picture of the Imperial War Museum, this is the one in Manchester. What I've done here is use the rule of thirds, so I've used the tall tower to sit on a third of the way into the image. Done the same in this Ashton Memorial photo, where I've used the main building on a rule of thirds. Now, more often than not, you're going to want to combine several composition rules together. And in particular, I tend to use things like leading lines or pathways that will lead you into the photo together with the rule of thirds. And don't forget, you can break the rule of thirds down into smaller chunks if you want. The rule of ninths is also another composition rule. It's a little bit more complicated to use. So if you think about breaking your rule of thirds grid down into ninths, just splitting each section up into three, then you can use those intersection points as well as points of interest in your composition. So when you're combining two rules together, like leading lines and the rule of thirds, you can end up with photos like these, like the Ashton Memorial. I'm using the steps, the handrail to lead you into the photo. I've got the building itself on a rule of thirds. The image of this bridge over the River Lune, I've done the same thing. I'm using the handrail and its structure to lead you into the photo and the bright spot that's on the river. And sometimes the sort of local geography will force you to choose which rules to use. For example, this picture of the Millennium Bridge on the River Tyne, I wanted to take it from the quayside. Could have taken it actually from the Tyne Bridge and got a bit more symmetrical, but it was actually quite tricky to do that. So it was easier to take it from the quayside and use different composition rules. And I've used things like reflections to make the photograph more interesting. So other rules like that. And you can see in these Preston bus depot photos, really made good advantage of leading lines here and the rule of thirds together. I put the edge of the building on a rule of third line, and I've used these leading lines of the car park structure to guide you into the photo and create interest. Now let's move on to my sort of third and final group, if you like, and that's to make your photographs more abstract and more artistic, and that's really where you can express yourself. So you do this by doing things like choosing smaller details. As you can see, I've done in this picture, this is the whole building, but I got in close and took some detailed shots, and I've used other aspects of the structure to make a more interesting shot. So these are little detail shots I've done, which I think also make interesting photos, because you can take advantage of the curves and the shape of the building to lead you into the photo and create interesting shape. shapes. But you can also do something like tilt your camera. So I've done this shot from very low down looking up, and that's what I've done with this Baltic Art Centre building just on the edge of the Tyne there, where I've got very low and done a shot looking right up, and that creates a lot of interest and it makes the photograph much more dynamic. And the final thing I should say is you want to look for balance in your photos, and that's what I've had to do here. You see, the Lowry building, it is pretty symmetrical if you look at the centre, but then you've got this big column across on one side which is hiding a gas meter. So what I've tried to do is I position the Lowry building, it's very slightly off centre, but it's trying to balance out the photo so that it looks quite natural. Done the same here with this Fortin Services building. This is the Lancaster Services building on the M6. Although the tower itself is quite symmetrical, there was another big building below it which offsets the balance. Could have done a close-up shot of the tower, but I chose to do this image and I've balanced it by moving the tower slightly off-centre so that you've got the other building which is off-centre the other side, and that's created balance in my photo. Those are a few tips you can use to go out if you're into architectural photography and try your skills. I'd love to see how you get on. By all means, share them in the Facebook group, which I'll leave a link to in the description. And if you haven't got it already, do go to my website, nifty50photographers.com. There you can sign up and you can get my free ebook, 50 Tips to Improve Your Photography. In the meantime, go out and have some fun with your camera, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.